The Magic Faraway Tree, Chapter 6. What can they do now? Joe, Moonface, Silky and Saucepan sat down by the hole and thought hard. Silky began to cry. The Saucepan Man looked most uncomfortable. He was very fond of Silky. "Silky, please do forgive me for being so careless," he said in a small voice. "I didn't mean to do this. Don't cry. You make me feel dreadful." "It's all right," sobbed Silky, borrowing Moonface's handkerchief. "I know you didn't mean to, but I can't help feeling sad when I think I won't ever be able to see my dear little room in the faraway tree any more." The Saucepan Man began to cry too. Tears dripped with a splash into his saucepans and kettles. He put his arm round Silky, and 2 or 3 kettle spouts stuck into her. "Don't," she said, "you're sticking into me. Moonface, Joe, can't you think of something to do? Can we possibly squeeze down if we hold our breath, make ourselves as small as we can?" "Quite impossible," said Moonface gloomily. "Listen, there's somebody coming up the ladder." They heard voices, and soon a head popped up out of the hole in the cloud. It was Rix. He stared in surprise at the 4 enormous people sitting by the hole. He climbed up and stood beside them, looking very, very small. Then up came Beth and Franny. Their eyes nearly fell out of their heads when they saw how big Joe and his friends were. "What's happened?" cried Wick. "We got worried because you didn't come home, Joe, so we climbed up to see where you were. But why are you so enormous?" Joe told them. Silky sobbed into Moonface's hanky. Beth put her arm around her. It was funny to feel Silky so very big. Beth's arm only went halfway round Silky's waist. "And now, you see, we can't get back down the hole," said Joe. "I know what you can do," said Rick suddenly. "What?" cried everyone hopefully. "Well, rub the hole with the spell, and it will get bigger, of course," said Rick. "Then you'll be able to get down it." "Why ever didn't we think of that before?" cried Joe, jumping up. "Saucepan, where's that can with the spell in it?" He picked up the can. Oh, it was completely empty. Every single drop had been spilt when Saucepan had fallen over. "Well, never mind," said Moonface, cheering up. "We can go and buy some more from that goblin. Come on." They all set off, Rick, Beth and Franny looking very small indeed next to the others. They went up to the goblin who had sold them the spell. "Please, can we have another can of that spell you sold us just now?" asked Moonface, holding out the empty can. "I don't have a drop left," said the goblin, "and I can't make any more till the full moon comes. It can only be made in the moonlight." Everyone looked so miserable that the goblin felt sorry for them. "Why do you look so unhappy?" he said. "What's happened?" Joe told him everything. The goblin listened with interest. Then he smiled. "Well, my dear," he said, "if you can't get a spell to make the hole big, why don't you buy a spell to make yourself small? My brother, the green goblin over there, sells that kind of spell. Only be careful not to put too much on yourselves, or you may go smaller than you mean to." They went over to the green goblin. He was yelling at the top of his voice, "Buy my wonderful and most amazing spell. It would make anything as small as you like. Do you have an enemy? Dab him with this, and see him shrink to the size of a mouse. Is your nose too big? Dab it with this, and make it the right size. Oh, wonderful, astonishing, amazing." Everyone hurried up. Moonface took some money out of his money bag. "I'll have the spell, please," he said. The green goblin gave him a can. The spell in it looked rather like paint, just as the other had done. "Now go slow," said the goblin. "You don't want to get too small. Try a little at a time." Moonface dabbed a little on Silky. She went a bit smaller at once. He dabbed again. She went smaller still. "Is she the right size yet?" asked Moonface. Everyone stared at Silky. "Not quite," said Beth, "but she is almost, Moonface, so be careful with your next dab." Moonface was very careful. At the next dab of the spell, Silky went to exactly her right size. She was so pleased. "Now you, Joe," said Moonface. So he dabbed Joe and got Joe back to his right size again too. Then he tried dabbing the Saucepan Man and soon got him right. His kettles and saucepans went right too. It was funny to watch them. "Now I'll do you, Moonface," said Joe. "Ah, no thanks, I'll do myself," said Moonface. He dabbed the spell onto himself and shrank smaller. He dabbed again and went smaller still. Then he stopped dabbing and put the brush down. "You're not quite your ordinary size yet," said Joe. "I know," said Moonface, "but I always thought I was a bit on the short side. Now I'm just about right. I always wanted to be a bit taller. I shan't dab myself any more." Everyone laughed. It was funny to see Moonface a bit taller than usual. As they stood there and laughed, a curious cold wind began to blow. Moonface looked all around and then began to shout, "Quick, quick, the land of spells is on the move. Hurry, before we get left behind." Everyone got a shock. Wow, it would never do to be left behind, just as everyone had got small enough to go down the hole in the clouds. They set off to the hole. The wind blew more and more strongly, and suddenly the sun went out. It was as if somebody had blown it out, Joe thought. At once darkness fell on the land of spells. Hold hands, cried Joe. "We'll lose one another if we don't." They all took hold of one another's hands and called out their names to make sure everyone was there. They stumbled on through the darkness. "Here's the hole," cried Joe at last, and down he went. He felt the ladder and climbed down that too. The others followed one by one, pushing close behind in the dark, longing to get down to the faraway tree they knew so well. How lovely it would be to sit in Moonface's room and feel safe. But down at the bottom of the ladder there was no faraway tree. Instead, to Joe's surprise, there was a narrow passage, lit by a swinging green lantern. "Oh my goodness," he said to the others. "What's this? Where's the faraway tree?" "We've come down the wrong hole," groaned Moonface. "Oh goodness, what bad luck." "Well, where are we?" asked Rick in wonder. "I don't know," said Moonface. "We'd better follow this passage and see where it leads to. It's no use climbing back and trying to find the right hole. We'd never find it in the dark. And anyway, I'm pretty sure the land of spells has moved on by now." Everyone felt very miserable. Joe led the way down the passage. It twisted and turned, went up and down steps, and was lit here and there by the green lanterns swinging from the roof. At last they came to a big yellow door. On it was a blue knocker, a blue bell, a blue mailbox, and a blue notice that said, "Mr. Changeabout, knock once, ring twice, and rattle the mailbox." Joe knocked once very loudly. Then he rang twice, and everyone heard the bell going ring, ring. Then he rattled the mailbox. The door didn't open. It completely disappeared. It was so peculiar. One minute it was there, and the next it had gone, and there was nothing in front of them. They could see right into a big underground room. At the end of it, by a roaring fire, sat a round, fat person. "That must be Mr. Changeabout," whispered Rick. "Dare we go in?" Chapter 7. Mr. Changeabout and the Enchanter. Everyone stared at Mr. Changeabout. At least, as he was the only person in the room, they thought that was who it must be. He got up and came towards them. He was a fat, comfortable-looking person with a broad smile on his face. What a lot of visitors," he said. "Do sit down." There was nowhere to sit except on the stone floor, which looked rather cold, so nobody sat down. Something happened to Mr. Changeabout when nobody obeyed him. He grew tall and thin. His broad smile disappeared, and a frown came all over his face. He looked a very unpleasant person. "Sit down," he roared, and everyone sat down in a hurry. Mr. Changeabout looked at the saucepan man, who had sat down with a tremendous clatter. "Have you got a nice little kettle that would boil enough water to make 2 mugs of hot chocolate?" he asked. The saucepan man didn't hear, so Joe shouted in his ear, and he beamed, got up, and undid a little kettle that he had on him. "Just the thing," he said, handing it to Mr. Changeabout. "Try it and see." Mr. Changeabout changed again and became happy-looking, with dancing eyes and a sweet smile. He took the kettle. "Thank you," he said. "So kind of you. Just what I wanted. How much is it?" "Nothing at all," said the saucepan man. "A present for you." "Well, allow me to hand round some chocolate to you all in return for such a nice present," said Mr. Changeabout, and he fetched an enormous box of chocolates from a cupboard. Everybody was pleased. Rick looked carefully into the box when his turn came. His hand stretched out for the very biggest chocolate of all. Mr. Changeabout at once changed again and flew into a rage. He became thin and mean-looking, his nose shot out long and his eyes grew small. "Bad boy, greedy boy," he shouted. "You shan't have any of my chocolates now, horrible greedy children." And at once all the chocolates changed into little hard stones. Beth had hers in her mouth and she spat it out at once. The others looked disgusted. The old saucepan man gave a yell. "I've swallowed mine, and now I suppose I've got a stone inside me. Oh, you nasty Mr. Changeabout, I'll show you what I think of your chocolates." And to everyone's surprise, Saucepan rushed at Mr. Changeabout, knocked his box of chocolates all over the room and began to shake him hard. Rattle, rattle, shake, shake. Gosh, how the old Saucepan man shook Mr. Changeabout. And Mr. Changeabout tried to shake Saucepan back, but what was the good of that? Saucepan was so covered in pots and pans that nobody could possibly shake him without hurting themselves. Clang, clatter, clang, cratter, bash. The kettles and saucepans made an enormous noise and everyone began to laugh, because really Saucepan looked too funny for words, dancing about on the floor, pushing and shaking Mr. Changeabout. Mr. Changeabout suddenly got very big and fierce-looking, but old Saucepan didn't seem to mind at all. He just went on shaking and pushing at him and shouted, "The bigger you are, the more there is to punish." So then Mr. Changeabout got very small as a mouse, and ran squealing across the floor in fright. Quick as lightning, Saucepan picked him up, popped him into a kettle, and put the lid on. "Oh, Saucepan, whatever will you do next?" said Joe, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "I've never seen such a funny sight in my life. Be careful Mr. Changeabout doesn't squeeze out the spout." "I'll stuff it with paper," said Saucepan, tearing some from the box of chocolates. "Now he's secure. Well, what do we do next?" "We'd better get out of here," said Joe, standing up. He turned towards the doorway. But what was this? There was no doorway and no door, only a wall of rock that ran all round the underground room now. "Oh no, how do we get out?" said Joe, puzzled. "This is a very magic kind of place." "There's no window, of course, because we are underground," said Rick. "What are we going to do?" "What about the chimney?" asked Franny, running to the fire. "It looks pretty big. Perhaps we could put the fire out and climb up." "Well, that looks like our only chance of getting out of here," said Joe. He looked round for some water to put out the fire. He saw a water pump by the wall and went to it. He put a bucket underneath and pumped the handle up and down. The water was bright green and soon filled the bucket. Joe threw it on the fire. It made a terrific sizzling noise and went out at once, puffing clouds of green smoke into the room. Joe stepped onto the dead fire and looked up the chimney. "There's an iron ladder going right up," he called in excitement. "Come on, we'll get dirty, but we can't help that. Hurry, before any more mysterious things happen." He went up the ladder. It was hot from the heat of the fire, but grew colder the higher he went. "What a long chimney," called back Joe. "Is everyone coming?" "Yes, yes," called 6 voices below him. Joe climbed steadily upwards. At last the ladder came to an end. Joe clambered over the top of it and found himself in a creepy place. "This looks like some kind of cellar," he said to the others as they scrambled up beside him. "Look at all those sacks piled up. What do you think is in them?" "Let's look," said Rick, who was always curious about everything. He undid a sack, and good heavens, out poured a stream of bright gold pieces. Everyone looked at it in amazement. "Somebody very rich must live here," said Joe at last. "I've never seen so much gold. I can't believe that all the sacks are full of it." He undid another sack and out poured gold again. Just as everyone was running their fingers through it and marvelling at the gleam and shine of the gold, they heard quick footsteps overhead. A door opened above them and a gleam of sunlight shone onto a flight of stone steps leading up from the cellar to the door. A tall man in a pointed hat looked down. "Gosh, it's an enchanter," whispered Moonface in a fright. "We must still be in the land of spells. Oh dear." "Robbers, thieves, burglars, shouted the enchanter in a loud voice. "Guards, come here, capture these robbers. They are after my gold. See, they've undone 2 sacks already." "We don't want your gold," cried Rick. "We only wanted to know what was in all these sacks." "I don't believe you," cried the enchanter, as about a dozen small elves came running past him down the steps to the cellar. "Capture them, guards, and lock them up." The little elves pulled everyone up the cellar steps into a big sunlit room. Its ceiling was so high that nobody could see it. "Now lock them up," commanded the enchanter. Moonface suddenly snatched a kettle from Saucepan and snapped the string that tied it to him. He went towards the enchanter fearlessly. "Wait," he cried, much to the surprise of all the others. "Wait before you do this foolish thing. I am an enchanter too. And in this kettle I have Mr. Changeabout. Yes, he is a prisoner there. And let me tell you this, that if you dare to lock me up, I'll put you into this kettle too, with Mr. Changeabout." From the kettle came a small squealing voice. "Set me free, enchanter, set me free. Oh, do set me free." The enchanter turned quite pale. He knew it was Mr. Changeabout's voice. This is most peculiar," he said. "How did you capture Mr. Changeabout? He is a very powerful person and a great friend of mine." "Oh, I'm not going to tell you what magic I used," said Moonface boldly. "Now, are you going to let us go, or shall I put you into this kettle too?" "I'll let you go," said the enchanter, and he waved them all towards a door at the end of the room. "You may leave at once." Everyone rushed to the door gladly. They all ran through it, expecting to come out into the sunshine. But they didn't. The enchanter had played a trick on them. They found themselves going up many hundreds of stairs, up and up and up, and when they came to the top, there was nothing but a round room with one small window. A bench stood at one end and a table at the other. The enchanter's voice floated up to them. "Ho, ho, I've got you nicely. Now I'm going to get my friend, Wizard Wily, and he'll soon tell me how to deal with robbers like you." "We are in a trap," groaned Joe. "Moonface, you were very clever and very brave, but honestly, we are worse off than ever. I simply don't see any way out of this at all."